Hi everyone, and welcome to what is the 6th annual Working in the Think Tank Sector outreach event. It's an event that's put on by a huge group of think tanks. They're all very different sorts of organisations doing very, very different things. The one common aim that they share, which is what brings us here today, is the desire to increase diversity inside their teams and particularly inside their research teams. My name's Anand Menon. I'm director of a think tank called UK in a Changing Europe, and I'm just here to introduce some of the themes that you might be talking about today. Our aim is to widen access to think tanks, and what I'm going to try and do briefly over the next 5 or 10 minutes is explain the sector to you, explain how think tanks work, what think tanks do, and give you something to think about. After that, you'll have a session led by HR teams from various think tanks who will answer questions you've got about contracts, about application requirements and things like that. You've got other sessions coming up on influencing public policy, and a final one on a day in the life of a researcher. So let's start thinking about what think tanks are and what think tanks do. I will now press the wrong button probably. Oh, marvellous. Oh, thank God for that. Okay, let's start with this. What do think tanks do? And you can see very clearly from that there are certain things. Not all think tanks do all these things. Not all think tanks do focus groups or public opinion surveys. But basically, the first role of a think tank is to identify problems, things that are going wrong, things that can be done better, things that really society needs to see improved. Most think tanks, not all, my think tank doesn't do the next step, for instance, because we're not allowed to, but most think tanks then go on to say, okay, here are some ideas to do things better. Here are some suggestions, here are some policy proposals. We can present them in a whole number of ways. It might be through publications. I'll talk to you right at the end of my presentation about ways of getting your message across and ways that are more effective than others. But this is about persuasion. So being in a think tank is about a number of things. One of those things is about thinking through problems. The other is being able to persuade other people, coming up with ideas in such a way that others are convinced that they want to do things the way that you suggest. And it's not easy. And it's not easy because, oh thank God, think tanks exist in a crowded ecosystem. So you can see from there, they're in an ecosystem where there are academics, journalists, charities, membership organisations, all those people who are equally desperate to impact on policy, equally interested in seeing politicians take on board their ideas. So it's a competitive world out there. Think tanks are part of the network, and our job essentially is to persuade. It might be journalists as a way of getting to public policy makers. It might be civil servants who are the public policy makers who can talk to politicians. It might be the general public itself. I mean, think tanks vary in who they're trying to persuade. When we did our work during the Brexit referendum, all our stuff was public. We were talking directly to the public. If you're trying to change a specific piece of public policy, you might be talking mainly to civil servants. But the key thing is those three groups are absolutely fundamental to getting your message across and to being effective. And of course, one of the things you learn very quickly in the think tank world is the strategies you need for influencing journalists, in my experience, largely lunch and alcohol, are very different to the sorts of strategies you might adopt to talk to policymakers or the general public. So you need to tailor your message to the audience you're talking to. Now, there are lots of different roles inside think tanks. Today, as I understand it, is mainly for people who want to work as researchers, but actually there's a whole gamut of activities from the operations side, which is made up, we're going to hear from HR people in the next session, but it's doing the financing, doing the IT, doing the human resources sort of work. Absolutely fundamental to making a think tank work. Our ops team are amazing in the sense that they just beaver away and you can sort of almost not notice them, but as soon as one of them's off, the whole organisation sort of grinds to a halt. I mean, they're the absolute heart of the organisation. The research team you'll hear a lot about today anyway, and you know, you can come from different disciplines, have slightly different roles, but I think that's quite clear cut. And then there's a whole load of other things. People who organise events. Organising events is a nightmare and you need to be quite skillful to do it because so many things can go wrong. Marketing stuff, designing stuff. We spend hours in our office sort of discussing what cover to put on reports and things like that. Public affairs, which is partly about selling the organisation, partly as of necessity for all our organisations, trying to raise money to keep ourselves going. And finally, comms, which is absolutely fundamental, because comms is about getting out there and figuring out how best to get your message out, how best to convince people that actually what we're doing is A, interesting, B, useful, and C, something you should be taking up and taking further as a way of changing public policy. Just a quick word. I think most of you are in university about the relationship between think tanks and academia, and I think it's a strange relationship in some ways, because having academic qualifications very much helps you get into think tanks, particularly if you're looking for a researcher role. I mean, it varies between think tanks how qualified you'd need to be. I would guess that if you wanted to be an economist at the IFS, you'd need to have some pretty hefty economics qualifications. Other think tanks do things very, very differently. So academic qualifications help, but that relationship doesn't necessarily work the other way around. I mean, one of the curious things about people who work in think tanks, and we found this with our own researchers, is just because you've worked very, very well in a think tank, it doesn't necessarily help you go on to get an academic career. It varies by discipline, it varies by the work you're doing, but because academic metrics are metrics about publishing in academic journals and things like that, the fact that you've written for the Financial Times or the Times, or you've done loads of blogs, or you've written policy papers which have led to policy change, doesn't necessarily give you the kind of CV you need to go into academia. So don't come into think tanks thinking it will help you further your academic career. Check that carefully and have a think about the sorts of qualifications you need to get into the think tank world. And I think that final point is a slightly cheeky point, but I'm going to say it anyway. A friend of mine once said to me, if universities did their job properly, we wouldn't need think tanks. And I sort of thought about that. And there is a degree of truth to it. Universities do a lot of identifying of problems. They do a lot of primary research. They look at a lot of public policy. What universities sometimes aren't particularly good at is taking that academic research that is usually buried in the pages of an academic journal that no one or very few people will ever read, and presenting it to the outside world. Quite often, think tanks sometimes just end up doing that last step. You get very good academics, you get them on a panel, and you make them talk to an audience they wouldn't normally talk to. So sometimes what think tanks do is they fill a gap that's left by universities that's changing. Academics talk more and more about things like impact. And impact is specifically about how your research can have an impact on the wider world. But still, I think there is a gap, and it's a gap that think tanks have managed to inhabit and to exploit. And this is the most important slide, I think, because the bottom line is working in a think tank is fantastic. It's brilliant, and it's brilliant for a whole load of reasons. It's brilliant because you're not just thinking about things, you're acting on them. You're trying to change things, and I think that really is very, very rewarding. It's very rewarding even to try, even if you don't succeed. Obviously, it's more rewarding if you do succeed. I'm here in the Resolution Foundation, which has shaped so many public policies over the years, I've lost count. But if you think about furlough, this organisation played a massive role in helping the then Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, devise the furlough programme. And, you know, if you know that people who make decisions are acting, at least in part, on the basis of the stuff you've done, it gives you a warm glow, the like of which I'm struggling to describe to you now. So in a sense, that's part of the joy of a think tank, is that you get to do real world stuff and you get to do things that impact on society and to shape the country. The other thing about being in a think tank is you spend most of your time talking to really interesting people. You know, you might be talking to journalists who work in an area, you might be talking to civil servants, you might be talking to the people who work in a certain area. You know, if you work on health, you might spend a lot of time talking to health professionals. But it's an absolute joy and a privilege to spend your time talking to interesting people who are interested in your ideas and, in a sense, whose lives you're trying to improve. So I would encourage you all to try and get in the think tank sector. I'm massively biased, obviously, because that's where I work. But I do think, in my experience of employment, and my experience is basically academia and think tanks, I've never done anything as rewarding as what I do now. Now, in the last few minutes, what I want to do is, firstly, make this thing work. Oh, God, I've gone forward. How do I go back? All right, there we go. Calm down. What I want to do is talk to you a little bit about what I said about communicating messages, because part of the trick of being a think tank is to present stuff in a way that people find interesting and accessible. My think tank has done a load of work on Brexit, okay? And that is the map of Brexit. The blue bits are the bits that voted leave. The yellow bits are the bits that voted remain. Now, there are several ways you can explain that to an audience. One, and this is going back to my academic career, is you can be very techie about it and do that. And that basically tells you that poorer areas were more likely to vote for Brexit. It's the sort of thing you might squint at. There are people in this room now squinting at it. It doesn't really tell you much unless you want to sort of really think it through, but there is a better way of doing it. And that better way, actually, it came to mind because of something very weird that happened during, if you remember, Rory Stewart ran to be mayor of London. And Rory's a bit of an odd bod, and there was one point when he was interviewed on LBC and they asked him, what's your favourite pub? And he said, Pret, which is a strange answer. And anyway, then Rory was pounced upon by a load of left-wingers for being a liberal elitist because he went to Pret. And I went back to my team, who were all in their 20s, and said, what's going on here? They said, yeah, Pret is posh. So I said, really? And they did a bit of work on this, and we came up with, oh God, that. There's an almost perfect correlation between places that have a Pret and places that voted Remain. In my book, that's a far easier and nicer and neater way of showing the data than a scatter plot with loads of dots on it. So one of the joys of working in a think tank is that you get to mess about with stuff and you get to do things like that, because actually if you're talking to an audience for whom time is short and who are actually a bit bored and actually want to get away and want you to give them the message as quickly as possible, doing it effectively is a really important thing. And just to give you one more example also about Brexit, this next, I'm struggling with this, that is a very boring graph. Okay, what that graph shows is that the more socially conservative you are, the more likely you are to have voted for Brexit. So that means, you know, if you support the death penalty, if you think that gay rights have gone too far, if you think there should be a limit to gender equality, all those sorts of worldviews are associated with being in favour of Brexit. It took me quite a while to explain that. It's quite techy and you're thinking, there's a really nice alternative explanation that does the same thing. If you like Mrs. Brown's Boys, you probably voted for Brexit. If you hate Mrs. Brown's Boys, you probably voted Remain. Now, these are silly examples of what we try and do in the think tank sector, but I think they're important examples nevertheless, because it shows that sometimes it's about how you communicate what you know as much as about what you know. And it's one of the reasons, for me at least, whilst being in a think tank is simply such good fun. Now, we're all panicking because I finished a bit earlier than I should have done, but let me just round off. I was so panicked about overrunning that I think I've done this too quickly, but let me round off by basically introducing the next panel and just saying to all of you, you can get on Slido. You should have the Slido link. You might even be watching this on Slido if I'm right. But on Slido, you can submit your questions, which I hope someone at some point will be able to answer for you. And finally, you've got an equal opportunities form, and it would be fantastic if you could fill that in, because it's good to know what kind of people attend, what we can do better next year to get a broader range of people to attend. If you can fill that out, that will be really, really good. So without further ado, in the next session, you're going to get a slightly longer break than was programmed because I've rattled through this. There's going to be people from New Philanthropy Capital, the Centre for Social Justice and the Green Alliance. I think people from HR who are going to talk to you about careers in the think tank sector. Thank you very much, and I'm very sorry to have been so fast.
Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining this section on working in the think tank sector. My name is Sarah Broad and I'm the Chief Operating Officer at New Philanthropy Capital, also known as NPC. And we're a think tank that focuses on maximising the impact of the charity sector. I'm thrilled to be able to be joined today by Caroline and Aruka, and I will hand over in just a second for them to introduce themselves. But before I do, just to let you know that we'll be taking questions at the end of the session. You can submit questions at any time via Slido, and please use the hashtag #ThinkTanks. Hashtag ThinkTanks, capital T, capital T. So first, Caroline, can I hand over to you to introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name is Caroline Fry. I work at the Centre for Social Justice, where I am the head of People and Operations. So the Centre for Social Justice, or the CSJ as we all call it, has been around for a little over 20 years now and focuses on helping people in the most kind of disadvantaged and deprived areas of the UK, working across a number of kind of typical topics like debt, addiction, homelessness, housing, that kind of thing, financial inclusion. And in my role as head of people and ops, the people side of things is all about things like driving a positive culture, talent acquisition, learning and development planning, that kind of thing. And then the operation side varies wildly from day to day. It could be very humdrum things like renewing our insurance and making sure we've got enough chairs in the office, or it could be really big kind of strategic things like writing a dashboard to capture all the organisational KPIs. And the reason I love working in a think tank, so I've been doing it for about 4 or 5 years now, is really to something that Anand said earlier, is kind of the variety of people that I get to work with. I work with some incredibly super duper intelligent researchers who kind of blind me with science and everything that they know. I work with charities who are kind of on the front line delivering to support, and I work with some of their people that they're working with, that they're supporting as well. I work with board levels. We've just had an event, we've had people from the House of Lords in, so I love kind of meeting all these different people and working with that large variety.
Brilliant, thank you. And Aruka, over to you to introduce yourself.
My name is Iruka Agenti, and I am the HR officer for Green Alliance. So what Green Alliance do is we try to, we're focused on influencing policies. We're focused on influencing policies, working with NGOs, businesses, and politics to accelerate actions for a greener and equitable UK. So in terms of my career, I have always worked in the charity think tank charity sector all my life. So it's all about being part of a cause has always been it for me. I like to be at the background, knowing that I am part of that organization that is influencing policies at certain places. And also, I'm quite like, I am inspired by with working with intellectuals. The people I work with, they're quite like, I enjoy working with them as intellectuals. So that's one of my motivation for working in think tanks.
Brilliant. Well, thank you both for being here. And for those online who are expecting to see a fourth person on the panel, unfortunately, Amy's not able to join us due to personal reasons today. So moving on, first of all, I'd like to ask our panel, what advice would you be able to give to people who are looking to work in the think tank sector? Particularly, what skills are recruiters looking for? And Caroline, I'll come to you first on this one.
Sure. So I think my main kind of, or my initial input here is to think about very specifically about the role that you might be applying for. So although there are some kind of typical areas that people might think of being as in kind of the field of study or interest that people have, such as philosophy, economics, politics, that kind of thing, that's all well and good for some roles in the think tank sector, but for other roles, for example, my role, not I'm going to say completely irrelevant, not completely irrelevant, but definitely not completely necessary. So I think it's important to really think about those skills that a particular job is looking for. So don't just think, oh, it's think tanks, I've got to be au fait with all the political goings on in the country, because you really don't need to be. There's many more skills that come into the fore depending on your role. So for example, mine could be about communication, about collaboration, about empathy. Those sorts of things are much more relevant for my particular role.
Yeah. Thank you, Caroline. That's really helpful. And Aruka, kind of building on that, what kind of skills do you look for when you're recruiting, both very specific skills and transferable skills as well?
I like to say really that think tanks have their processes and what they look for, and this would also depend on the role. For a more senior role, we'll be looking at specific specialization regarding to the role itself. In general, we're looking at communication skills, as mentioned before. We're also looking at ability to collaborate, writing skills, great attention to details, which is quite important. And being curious about learning as well will be very helpful, because you may not exactly come in with that skills, but you're coming in to learn the skills itself. So you don't have to have the skills at all to come in, but you have to be curious and be prepared to learn. And also, some transferable skills like
Not at all. I'm with you on this one.
Transferable skills,
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and I completely relate to that. I know that a lot of undergraduates I meet, kind of who are interested in a career in the think tank sector, ask if they need previous work experience. And as you very rightly say, Aruka, it's less about your work experience and more about the skills you can bring. So, you know, the communication skills, for example, if at university or at school you've been part of a sports team and you can give really good practical examples about how you've communicated with different types of people, with different styles of learning to achieve a common goal, that's a really good example of a transferable skill.
Yeah, I was also going to say you could volunteer in the skills that you think that the organization might be looking at. You could do some volunteering, and those skills that you gain can be transferred into the roles that you go into.
Yeah, absolutely spot on. So yeah, very much key messages. You don't have to be an expert in a think tank or have very specific and direct experience.
Not at all.
But building on that a little bit, Caroline, we've already heard today that there are lots and lots of different think tanks. The three of us work for very different organisations. How important is it that candidates have experience in the mission of the organisation that they are applying for?
So I think, further to what Aruka was saying, experience possibly to some extent, interest absolutely. I think that's really key. All think tanks are mission-driven organisations, so when you're applying to any of us, you really need to get drilled down and think about what our mission and vision and purpose and values and all that good stuff are, and how that reflects to your own interests in that area. So for example, if you were applying to Aruka's organisation, you better have a really good elevator pitch about why kind of environmentalism and sustainability is so important to you and why it aligns to everything you do sort of day in, day out. If you're applying to another think tank, which is all about economics, for example, you could then think about why that is important to you in your kind of day-to-day life. So, so to summarise, I think that experience is always good. It's always good to get some experience, but it's absolutely not the be-all and end-all. And I think if you can concisely communicate why you're passionate about a particular area that a think tank is working in, that's going to put your head and shoulders above the competition.
Absolutely. And I know another question we quite commonly get asked is about people who are perhaps, looking to change careers. So it may not be somebody who is at the beginning of their career and just finished university. It might be somebody who, for whatever reason, has taken a career break or is looking to switch from the private sector or a different sector into a think tank. And based on your experience, Aruka, are there any barriers to those types of candidates applying for roles?
I don't think so, really. I think what you need to look at is what you bring into the role. again, we say it wouldn't be about your degree or what you're doing currently, but the kind of experiences that you have used in the role. For example, if you've managed a team or you're managing a team and you're coming into a think tank, the skills that you use with relating to a team and managing a team is quite relevant to what you bring. So I will say the focus will be on what you bring in and the transferable skills, again, that you bring in from the sector that you're coming into the sector you're going into.
Thank you, both of you. So what I'm hearing very loud and clear from everybody on the panel is, if you're interested in working in a think tank, brilliant. You don't have to have a relevant degree. It's about your skills and your attitude and your appetite to learn. Think laterally about all of those different things you've experienced in your life that can give real and tangible examples of that. It's also really important to demonstrate that you understand the mission of the think tank that you're applying for, and that you're able to convey very genuinely your interest and your passion for that think tank, as opposed to any other think tank.
Yep.
Brilliant. Well, let's move on to the application process itself. Iruka, coming to you first this time. Can you briefly describe your organisation's application process and where do you find your candidates?
So application process was manual, whereby you complete your form and then you send to the recruitment inbox. But we're now moving to an applicant tracking system, which is called Team Taylor, where you would have to go into search for the jobs that you desire. You would need to complete pre-questions and then come to the questions, 3 core questions, which will be relating to the job you're applying for. You will need to prove that you show evidence that you are able to do the job. By that, I mean that you will give examples of what you bring to the role, examples in relation to the job description, bringing that to light to convince us that, yes, you actually have the skills and you can bring it to light. And then when you do that, you also would need to submit your CV in Team Taylor. And just to say, this is a system that we use. Other organizations will have different ways of doing it. We have a blind recruitment system in such that all applications are anonymized. The managers don't see who has applied, so it comes through that way. And I believe with that, we're able to reach especially the less represented groups in the think tank. We have another aspect of connection, which would be on Team Taylor. It's where you would need to come in to connect to Green Alliance. For example, now there is no vacancy on our side, but you could say that you want to connect with us. You send your CV in and put the kind of jobs you would like to be contacted for in future. So that is the application process at the moment.
That's really interesting, and I really like the way that you have the ability for interested candidates both to respond to a very specific job that's available now and register an interest for jobs that might be available in the future.
In the future
that's
as well.
That's really helpful.
Yeah.
And Caroline, based on your experience, where do you normally source candidates from? How do you go about telling people that there are jobs available?
So we're very lucky at the CSJ in that we have quite a lot of existing interest, so existing parties who seem to somehow magically find out about our jobs sometimes. So we actually don't do a ton of advertising, but we do always post all our jobs on our social media channels and on our own website. And we also use the Work for MP website, which is a great recruitment channel for anyone who wants to work in the sort of political or vaguely sort of political world and the world around that. So they're the channels that we always use. So I definitely recommend to anyone watching today that if you're interested in a particular think tank, to follow their social media channels, regularly checking on their website. You might even be able to set alerts, and then you'll be able to know as soon as any jobs come up. And then other channels that we sometimes use are the Guardian Jobs is great in terms of reaching a great big pool of people. Almost everyone seems to be registered with them, so it's a great way to reach a lot of people at once. And charity job is another way. So our think tank, as it happens, is not set up as a charity, but many are. But we do have a charitable purpose, and we work with in the not-for-profit space, I guess. So charity job is another way to kind of look for roles.
Just to add to that as well, the where we advertise our jobs, we do on LinkedIn, on our website, on Charity Jobs and Guardian as well.
Okay.
Just
Yeah,
like,
interesting. Yeah.
Caroline's,
Absolutely, and a lot of commonality. So what I'm hearing is if you're interested in think tanks in general or a specific think tank, connect on LinkedIn, follow their website, Work for MP, Guardian, Charity Jobs, great recommendations to make sure that you know when jobs become available and proactively register your interest. I'm also mindful that this particular session is targeting people from underrepresented groups who might be interested in joining the charity sector. So I know, speaking from my own experience, we quite commonly link in with specialist organisations who can help and support us because we're not necessarily experts in every space. So speaking from personal experience, there's an organisation called Leonard Cheshire who run a programme called Change 100, which very specifically targets individuals who have a disability. There's another organisation called Charity Works that offers a range of different opportunities to individuals who might be interested. But Caroline, Aruka, I'm very conscious that we need to allow time to hear from the questions from participants. So I'm just going to have a little look at the questions that are being submitted through Slido. And thank you to everybody who has taken the time to do that. Please keep submitting them in. And I can see here there's an awful lot of interest. And so apologies if I don't get the chance to read out your question specifically. There is somebody monitoring the chat online who will make sure that you get a response. And I'm going to try and group some of these questions into themes so that we cover as many people as possible. So one of the key questions that we've had come in is around internships. So perhaps for people who are still studying, perhaps not ready to apply for a full-time job, do your organisations support internships, and where might interested individuals go to get more information? Caroline, perhaps I come to you first on that one.
Yep, so we do at the Centre for Social Justice, we call it work experience rather than internships, I guess because it's shorter term perhaps than the word intern might think. So we offer those on a rolling basis across the entire year. They usually kind of take up a period of 1 to 4 weeks that people can come and work with us for, and effectively they would be kind of sitting within one of the areas of our organisations. It could be policy, it could be communications, it could be within our charity team or in the ops team with me, and they will kind of be given a kind of little project or something like that to work on in those 1 to 4 weeks. In terms of how people find out about them, if you go onto the CSJ website, there's About section, there's jobs, there's a link there to our recruitment kind of inbox, and people can just kind of send us their CVs at any point and we'll try and pop them into the most relevant area. What's really important to us is that we don't have someone who comes to us who's interested in one area and we just go, oh great, we need them in the other area, because that's not going to work for everybody. So we do take that very, very seriously, that kind of matchmaking, I guess.
Absolutely, and can I also ask a question that I know is very important to several people who are on Slido is, are your internships or work experience opportunities paid?
Sadly, ours are not, but what we do is we cover expenses for travel, so for people who are having to come in to our office in Westminster.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, speaking from personal experience, I think different think tanks take different approaches.
Yeah.
So certainly at MPC, where I work, we work in conjunction with some of the organisations I mentioned previously to offer kind of work placement schemes. And by working in conjunction with those organisations, we do pay all of our interns. But every organisation is different, and that's a really important question. And you should never be afraid to kind of pick up the phone and talk to the recruitment team at any point during the process. Aruka, kind of looking at another kind of aspect of the questions that have come in, a couple of people on Slido are more experienced in their career. They've perhaps had a career break, or they are perhaps looking to change from another kind of part. Similar question, how would you view those candidates and how would you encourage them to engage with your organisation?
Thank you very much. I think just before I answer that, I just wanted to touch on the internship bit. We have a program that we run in which we have 3 interns who work with us. It's called, they come in as trainees. We've always had that program where we have like entry graduates to come in. So we have 3 interns, or not interns, trainees in Green Alliance at the moment, working in different departments. It's a kind of internship in collaboration with another organization, and they are paid for it. So it's quite open to other people to look online and find such. And coming back to your question, if there's been a career break, you're still welcome to apply for roles. If you were on career break as a parent, for example, you could bring in the experiences that you have in terms of when you apply for the roles. There wouldn't be like any discrimination because you have been on career break. Our jobs are open to everyone. So we encourage everyone, no matter if you've been on career break, to apply. And to focus, when you apply for this job, focus on the things that you will bring to the role. Focus on the job description and see what you can bring to the role when you've had a career break.
Super, thank you, Aruka. And what I'm hearing is a very consistent theme is transferable skills. That seems to be a real theme that's coming out. And interestingly, as a segue from that, another person on Slido has asked, what are the most important skills needed to successfully pursue a role in the think tank? So I'm going to put you on the spot now, ladies. If you had to pick just one, what would you say is the most important? That's a really hard question, I know.
Okay, well, I'm going to caveat it first and then try and choose one. Is that, as we've spoken about before, you really need to think about the job that you're going for. There's no point in having amazing tech skills if you're going to be a non-tech person, like a researcher or whatever, or vice versa. So think very specifically about how your skills might fit into the very specific role at the think tank you're applying for. I would say if I had to choose one, I'd probably say communication, but it's a bit of a cheat because communication is made up of writing, listening and reading. So thinking about researchers, which is what I'm sure a lot of people on the call today will be thinking about. Research, obviously you need to be great at writing reports. These are the things that we're going to be using to then speak to government, speak to the people in power to try and make the change that Anand was talking about earlier. Listening is very important, so that we're listening, for example, at the CSJ, we're listening to lots of charities that we're working with. What do they hear? What do we do? What do we need to work on? Where are the improvements that need to be made? And then also speaking, doing events like this, kind of launching reports, speaking to the MPs, speaking to the Lords, those kind of things are really important as well. So bit of a cheat answer there. But
it was a cheat answer, but I'll allow it because it was a good answer. But building on that, Aruka, another person has asked, are there any online courses to help upskill in certain technical areas such as project management? And I know for my organisation, those skills are excellent to have, but are certainly not a prerequisite for kind of entry-level roles. But what are your views on that?
For entry-level roles and for most roles, you don't need like the project management. What was that?
Yeah, the specific question was
again?
technical areas or project management.
You don't need technical skills. Most of the when you come into the job, you learn on the job. So in terms of things that you can learn online, there are lots of platforms that offer training on any areas that you would like to go into, but it's not a prerequisite to get to apply for or get the job in a think tank. I say again, it would depend on the role and the think tanks and as well.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. Thank you, Aruka. And as ever with these kind of conversations, the time absolutely flies by. So thank you to everybody who has taken the time to submit a question through Slido. And as I said, we do have a colleague who's monitoring the chat and is posting responses to your specific questions. So I hope we've covered a broad spectrum of those, and apologies if we've not gotten to your direct question. We will seek to address those through the chat. So before we move on to close, I'd just like to invite both Aruka and Caroline to kind of reflect back on everything we've talked about and perhaps share their one top tip for people listening who are interested in applying for a role in a think tank. Aruka, what would be your top tip?
I would say if you feel that you don't have all the requirements for the role, I'll advise you still apply. If you think you need that you, even if it's a higher role, still apply. Because I personally believe that the application process and the interviewing process is a learning process in its own. Who knows, you might get an interview and even get the job. And if you don't get the job, the feedback you get when you've applied or when you attend an interview, it's a massive learning process that can get you the next job you apply for.
Brilliant. That's a really good tip. Thank you, Aruka. Caroline?
Yeah, great tip. Totally agree with that. I'm going to talk about transferable skills. I feel like we've all used that little phrase quite a lot, but I think it's really important. We might have quite a lot of people on the call today who haven't formally worked before, and it's really thinking about what transferable skills have you got in your life, not in work necessarily, but in your life, that you might be able to talk about at your interview. So you mentioned, Sarah, if you're part of a team, perhaps you were the captain of a netball team or you just play in the netball team, then you can kind of show leadership and teamwork through that. Some other examples are, for example, if you were, organising something for fundraising at school or at college, you might have done a sponsored 10K or, sold something or other or done a charity auction, and that's also kind of entrepreneurship and fundraising. Or perhaps it's even something as simple as you used to babysit your little brother when they were younger, and again that's kind of thinking about having responsibility and and accountability. So I think if we all use a bit of creativity and think hard enough, we can all think about those transferable skills we can bring in from other parts of our life. So I just encourage people to think about that, and then when they're answering those interview questions, they're well prepared to kind of come back on those.
Thank you. Another excellent example. And I guess I'll round out by saying my top tip would be to make sure that you are really clear on the job you are applying for. I know certainly I review a lot of job applications, and it's quite easy to spot those who have tailored their cover letter and their CV and their responses to any questions to the organisation they are applying for and to the role that they are applying for, rather than just sending a generic CV. And therefore it does take a little bit more time, but that time is well invested. You'll find on a lot of job adverts, the essential criteria for the job and the desirable criteria for the job are very clearly listed, and making sure you address those using the language that the recruiter is using to demonstrate that you've listened and thought about what they're looking for is really, really important. So that leaves it to me just to wrap up this session now. So first of all, thank you to Aruka and thank you to Caroline for sharing their tips. Thank you to all of those of you for listening and for submitting your great questions through Slido. Please do take a few moments to fill in the Equal Opportunities form. It's the way we get to understand who's engaging with this and how we can learn for the future. There's a 5-minute gap between our next segment, which is all about influencing the policy. And on that session, panellists will discuss how their work and the work of their organisations has helped to influence policy and what impact means. So I hope you enjoyed this session, and thank you once again for joining us.
Hello, my name is Cameron Arifadeb and I'm an economist at the Resolution Foundation, and I'm chairing this session on influencing policy. I'd like to remind attendees that questions will be answered towards the end, and please do submit them questions. We're on Slido and the hashtag is thinktanks, capital T for both words. I'm joined by a really exciting panel. We've got Beth Prescott from the Centre of Social Justice, we've got Sophie O'Connell from the Green Alliance, and we've got Sachin Seva from the Institute for Government. So it should be a really exciting session. So what does influencing policy mean? I think influencing policy can take a wide shape of form. We've got the more sort of obvious direct lobbying, indirect approaches, which could involve shaping public opinion, and also working with external partners. There's really no one-size-fits-all approach, and many of these different approaches can be combined. And I think that's what means it should be a really exciting session today, hearing from all the different think tanks about how they go about this. And what's important for think tanks influencing policy if we sort of take a step back? I think we can really boil it down into three things in my opinion. First is the research has got to be excellence and rigor driven, high quality evidence-based research. And I think something that really is important for us at Resolution Foundation is that our conclusions follow from correct numbers, not the other way around. So that excellence and rigor is so important. The second thing that's really important is building relationships, whether that be with journalists, wider networks, civil service. We've got to make sure our findings are noticed. Otherwise, that defeats the purpose of doing so. And thirdly, I think perhaps underappreciated point is creativity. We're able at think tanks to do things in levels of detail that perhaps government, civil service aren't able to do, and bringing that creativity, that new approach into the debate is really what makes it really exciting to work at a think tank, and is a brilliant way that we're able to influence policy. I joined the Resolution Foundation back in the back end of 2023, and something that I'll never forget was working on my first budget here in November 2023, when the then Chancellor Jeremy Hunt in his budget announced, I've listened closely to many colleagues, as well as the Institute for Fiscal Studies, the Resolution Foundation, Citizens Advice, and the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, who said that unfreezing local housing allowance was an urgent priority. So that for me was particularly a really stark and powerful reminder of just how important the work that think tanks do and how much you can directly influence policy. For the then Chancellor in his big budget speech to announce a major policy change and to specifically mention the think tank that I just joined was a really poignant moment, and one that has stuck with me there. So I'd now like to sort of invite my panelists to sort of give their reflections on this broader influencing policy point, and we'll hear from each of them, and then we'll go into the Q&A. So I'll start with Sachin from the Institute for Government, talk about some of their opportunities and challenges of engaging government on policy priorities and also non-policy priorities as well. So Sachin, over to you.
Yeah, of course. So at the Institute for Government, we think about how government can achieve its outcomes most effectively. So it's less about what those outcomes should be, but what's the best way for government to be set up and how to achieve it. Now, that isn't the priority for every government. So one quite big piece of work we did in 2016-17 was about how you can improve fiscal policy making and how you can do tax and spend decisions effectively. Needless to say, kind of the broader context of Brexit and political instability meant that there wasn't necessarily that much attention for that in government because they had other priorities going on. So, how do you actually make sure that those things happen? But we thought it was still valuable to say, as a point of principle, we did work with the Institute for Fiscal Studies and the Chartered Institute of Taxation, for instance, and we kept kind of banging the drum quite privately through relationships with Treasury officials, through people working in the Office for Budget Responsibility, for example. And that meant that when you've actually got the opportunity of kind of window opening, with the potential for a new government coming in, who might be thinking more seriously about how they want to do tax and spend decisions, and might be thinking about longer term things like that we had this great kind of corpus of work built up, like you said, having the right numbers in place, having the right evidence base, and also having those right relationships, both with officials and kind of with other think tanks as well, so that you can build up that expertise and credibility. It meant that we were really well placed to be listened to by the Chancellor and by the Treasury team and shadow Treasury officials and people currently in post to reform the way in which budgets are done. And that work started, quite a long time ago. So a lot of it is really just about, even if something isn't a priority right now, what can you do to build up your credibility, to build up those relationships, and to build up that kind of coalition of support, so that when the right opportunity opens up with potential change in government, with a government where it might be one of their priorities, that you can make the case effectively and say, here's what the problem is, here's the work that we've done, and here's what we think our solutions are, and actually be able to tailor that to the actual situation at hand.
Yeah, that's actually a brilliant point there around how you can influence non-policy priorities. It's important to have the evidence base there and ready to go, and all of the institutions for government's work is really, really interesting in that regard, and the sort of mechanisms in which government operates. I'll now pass over to Beth from the Centre of Social Justice to sort of talk about their multi-pronged engagement approach and specifically a really exciting school absence campaign that they worked on.
Brilliant, thank you, and thank you to everyone watching today. My name is Beth and I lead the education work at the Centre for Social Justice. And as mentioned, we have been involved in a really exciting campaign recently about school absence. There's no doubt that the pandemic had a massive impact on children's lives, and that is nowhere more clear than the number of children who are simply not engaging in their education. We have 1 in 5 children persistently absent, that is missing 10% or more of their school time, and nearly 160,000 children missing more than half of their school time, severely absent children. This is something that we at the Centre for Social Justice uncovered a few years ago and have been campaigning on ever since, and managed to get it to the forefront of conversation about education. Now, I think you hit the nail on your head earlier where you talked about both evidence-based recommendations and also multi-pronged approach. Because the reality is there's no one secret ingredient to kind of influencing policy. Often you have to take that kind of multi-pronged approach, and frankly a heck of a lot of determination and perseverance as well. In our school absence work, that looks like real evidence-based research, speaking to the sector, to schools, to alternative provisions, to charities, to family support workers, to youth workers, and looking at the data itself, the official data itself, to uncover a real expansive set of recommendations that we believe will help turn the tide on the school absence crisis. Relationships is so key, building relationships with ministers, with shadow ministers, with senior civil servants, and with kind of other backbench MPs in this space as well. And I think as well what we've had to do with our campaign, I'm sure many colleagues have been similar over recent years, is build those relationships on cross-parties, so that when something comes, such as a general election, it doesn't kind of set you back in any sense, but already the incumbent government are already aware of the situation and have a plan to tackle it. I think public awareness can play a really key role. The Centre for Social Justice, we've had a really strong media and public affairs campaign around our absence work, helped by some fantastic journalists who kind of really care about and are passionate about the issue, and this helps get public awareness on side, which is frankly bounds government into taking action because of how many people are talking about it. And finally, that data is so important. Telling that story through the data, tracking that data, talking to government about the long-term outcomes if they don't take action, and helping them realise that investment now means saving later, and that is no more so the case than in our education.
Thanks so much, Beth. That's absolutely a fascinating campaign and such an important one going forward, and that invest to save point is really, really well made. And lastly, and certainly not least, I'll pass over to Sophie from the Green Alliance, and it'd be really interesting to hear sort of how your work sort of differs and how you work with organisations in the environmental sector.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Sophie, Senior Policy Advisor in our climate team at Green Alliance. So I do a lot of work on the research side of things, but we also have a big politics team that does a lot of the political engagement work that we do. But I wanted to shed light on how we as a charity and think tank differ from other environmental organisations that we work with. So a lot of environmental organisations that people will know will be Extinction Rebellion or Greenpeace and those kind of public-facing organisations that do a lot of public mobilising and have local branches and member community groups. And we do a lot of work with those, not necessarily Extinction Rebellion, but Greenpeace and others that also have policy teams in their organisation, which wasn't something that I was aware of when I was first getting interested in the environmental sector. But we do a lot of more inside track work where we're working with politicians and presenting our research and evidence-based research to those politicians to make those arguments. But a lot of those arguments are also echoed broadly across the sector. So through the Stop Cambo campaign, those that are campaigning against oil fields, through public mobilisations, we echo those calls and are actively against opening up of new oil and gas in the UK and pushing to move towards renewables. But this is really only to say that there are a lot of other organisations working tirelessly across the environmental movement, and those with a more public-facing kind of campaign means that they get to build public support and push the Everton window into what is possible in terms of policy change, and then we can go and do the research on how government can achieve that. And then when it's coming from us with a slightly different and more pragmatic tone, it seems like quite a sensible option, and that's broadly how the environmental movement achieves policy change. But at Green Alliance, we also do a lot of work with the civil service. So when we have done research, we build up good relationships with specific teams. For instance, on sustainable aviation fuel in the Department for Transport, we worked with that team quite closely and asked them directly what were the research gaps that they had that we could potentially fill that would mean that certain policy change would be achievable. So there's a few different ways that we work, but we do convene a lot of the broader environmental movement and provide some strategic communications advice, and we bring together a lot of the political leads very regularly, as well as higher up CEOs, to make sure that as a whole movement we're all pushing towards the same goals, and so we look like we have coherent asks, although we operate in different ways.
Thanks. Yeah, that's such an important point in terms of building partnerships and working both with the civil service and then politicians and also other organisations. And the Green Alliance's work there is a real, particularly in the environmental sector, is really leading the way in the UK. So we now move on to some questions from the audience. So I would really encourage anyone watching to submit some questions on Slido, and the hashtag is thinktanks. So I'll start with a question specifically around the challenge around shaping the narrative and then adjusting yourself to sort of what the existing priorities are. So Sachin, you sort of touched upon this during your piece, so I might come to you first. Is what balance do you think there is in terms of saying the government has announced these are its policy priorities, these are the agenda, so we're going to fit into it, and how much do you think that actually a think tank also has the opportunity to actually maybe change the public opinion around that and maybe influence changing those priorities more broadly?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting one. And I guess some of these things will be a bit longer term. If you want to change the priorities of the government, that might be in kind of alliance with other organisations across a particular movement, for example. I think some of it can also be about the way in which you frame your recommendations. So the government might set out a broad objective, for instance, or a broad priority that it has, but it might not necessarily have a clear idea about what the problem is, and they might not necessarily have that diagnosis exactly right. I think think tanks are quite well placed as in terms of the expertise that they can bring to identify what that objective might be, and that might lead to a different kind of solution than what the government initially thought. And I think having that strong research base in place means that you can shape that narrative a little bit more than if you don't have that strong diagnosis of what a policy problem might be.
Yeah, definitely, and I think that striking that balance is so important. And I'm wondering if I could come to you, Sophie, on this, on the importance of effective communication. So obviously, I've sort of emphasised a lot in my opening how important the rigorous research base is, and in terms of our evidence base, but actually the communication side is so important. And I'm wondering if you might want to talk a little bit about sort of the communication side within Green Alliance and how important sort of that team is as well.
Yeah, we have quite a big communications team at Green Alliance, so we operate in a few different ways, like I said, with our politics team and also policy and research team. We do quite in-depth analysis and reports that we then present to politicians. We try to make very technical analysis easily to be understood by MPs who might be completely new to the topic and their teams. So we try to make it accessible, include lots of graphics and visualizations, but we also try to bring people together in events like this and get people together in rooms and also online for different events so that we can have proper kind of nuanced conversations. We also do communication behind the scenes with politicians and their teams and in the civil service, like I said. So having clear meetings and setting out objectives for those and making sure that our priorities kind of mirror the government's priorities and fit into the government's like current 5 missions, for instance, at the moment. They're prioritising clean power, but we have a lot more broader asks in the environmental movement. So how can we make those fit into their priority around housing and around improving living standards for people? We've also done a lot of work on health recently and trying to kind of shoehorn that into their priority of getting our waiting lists in the NHS and on prevention of poor health through a lot of climate action. So yeah, seeing how you can kind of fit your priority into what is the government's priority is something that has been effective for us.
Yeah, definitely. I can imagine so. And making sure that point you make there about making sure the research is accessible as possible is so important, because sometimes some of the work you do is really exciting, really technical, but you have to be able to explain it as if to a layperson. Otherwise, it's so difficult for whether that be civil servants or the press to really pick it up and distill it in a clear, concise message. And then Beth, I'd love to know more about sort of the campaigning side of it as well. So your school absence campaign was really interesting, and wondering how specifically do you look first at the data and then come up with sort of the campaign, or is it broadly, we know, for instance, school absence is an issue, this is what we're going to look at, vice versa? And are there any sort of other campaigns that the Centre of Social Justice are working on at the moment that sort of you would like to give a plug to, and it'd be really interesting to hear about?
Great. I think one of the key things and one of kind of our real benefits as the Centre for Social Justice is, as my colleague Caroline mentioned on the earlier panel, we have the CSJ Alliance, which is an alliance of small local charities working very much on the front line of the streets of Britain, that are usually the first to hear about challenges as they arise. Everyone here will know, who's worked in a think tank, that usually government data lags like a few months behind. So the absence data is usually 2 or 3 terms behind, just by the very nature of getting the data. So through our CSJ Alliance of charities who are working on the ground with these kids who were frankly struggling to engage in school post-pandemic, they were the ones that started to tell us this is going to be a massive issue. So we were switched on and looking for it in the government data before that data was even published. So I think a key part of that is initially listening to what's happening on the ground, and where there are patterns where different charities in different areas of the country or different schools are telling you this is a problem, picking up on that and thinking, okay, like we need to be looking for that, so that when the data comes out, you're ready, you're looking for it, you're able to then also use that to add to the campaign, as well as that on the ground experience to come up with some really well tested recommendations. And I think actually the impact of the pandemic on children's education stretches further than just school absence. We're currently also experiencing record rates of school exclusions and school suspensions, which is something we're campaigning about at the moment as well. I know we've spoken about the importance of kind of cross-sector working and working with other think tanks and organisations. We're part of a coalition called Integrated that's campaigning on that very point to reduce preventable exclusions and to promote inclusive schooling. Because across the board, we're just seeing more and more children, particularly children from disadvantaged backgrounds, disengaging with their education post-pandemic.
Yeah, that's absolutely fantastic, and that's really that school inclusion campaign sounds really fascinating. Such a important topic where there's also like a real sort of ethnicity element to it as well, with some certain groups being sort of overrepresented in school exclusions. We've had a couple of really great questions come in, and I might go in reverse order if that's all right. So coming to you first, Beth. So this is the question: what do you think are the key skills for translating research into real policy change, and how can entry-level professionals build them? Really great question.
Yeah, great. I think just really grounding yourself in the issue and speaking to as many people as you can. I mean, again, coming back to what we do as the CSJ is that what we often do, what our solutions are often based on, our recommendations are often based on, is what's working locally. Again, there's some fantastic charities out there who are doing some really great local solutions to some of the big issues facing our nation. And often a lot of those solutions are, you are able to kind of take and implement on a national scale. So it's taking inspiration from what already worked and lobbying government to deliver that on an international scale. In terms of skills as perhaps entry level into this sector, I'd say curiosity is a really important skill in terms of kind of wanting to understand the world and kind of what's going on and what can be done about it. I'd say communications, again, is really important in terms of being able to communicate perhaps some of those more complex issues in layman's terms. I would say, do you know what, honestly, I'd say determination and passion is really key. I came into the education sector because even though I'm from quite a deprived town in West Yorkshire, I'm actually a non-graduate myself, but I did benefit from a really good state school education, and that is why I want to make sure that other children are able to benefit from a state school education that opens those doors, kind of picking your area that you're passionate about, and kind of working in that means that you'll kind of never want to not go into work every day and continue fighting for it.
Yeah, that's absolutely brilliant. That curiosity and passion, we can really see the passion coming through, which is brilliant. And like curiosity and passion, I think, are two absolutely pillars of what it is to be able to influence policy, and being able to come into work really passionate every day and be curious about some of the challenges within your specific field, I think is absolutely vital. I'll come to you now, Sophie, and a really good question here about public distrust of experts and institutions. So the question is, given the growing public distrust of experts and institutions, how do you ensure that think tank research remains credible and accessible to the wider public, not just to policymakers and elite circles? Ooh, tough question.
Yeah, that is a big question. So a lot of our work is not necessarily public facing in terms of our outputs. It's more towards politicians and parliamentarians, but we do have social media which kind of breaks it down in a bit more of an accessible way, which obviously the public can follow and find us on there. I think there is quite a lot of distrust, and sometimes we try and strike a balance between presenting our work on certain outlets in a way that makes it kind of accessible for interrogation as well from journalists, and really having that and being open to that and being open to being questioned, I think can build a lot of trust. But I think also there's a need to really educate the public and make them aware that scientific institutions and people that are pushing for certain policies is grounded in scientific evidence. There is a lot of kind of climate skepticism, particularly in politics at the moment, which is worrying. But all we can do is point to the evidence that we have, and also how it's impacting people's lives already on a day-to-day. So climate change is here and now. We're seeing more extreme weather in the UK through floods in the winter, and also extreme heat that we have in the summer, and that is costing lives and making people's quality of life much poorer. And if we can point to that evidence, then it's pretty clear and pretty non-negotiable. We do also do some work to help kind of brief the press, to try and shape the types of questions that are asked. We don't think we're in a position where we need to be questioning whether climate change is real or not now. The evidence is pretty unequivocal on that, and we've had cross-party consensus for a while in the UK government on that. So we're trying to move towards what the solutions are, and those solutions that can bring about better living standards and quality of life for everyone. So yeah, bringing the benefits of those policies to light is really worth highlighting, I think, because a lot of scepticism is rooted in false information around the cost of net zero, etc. So just, repeating your message over and over again until you're bored of it is what a lot of politicians and those in the think tank sector have to do.
No, definitely, and I can imagine, particularly in sort of with some of the debate around net zero, that's so important for sort of institutions like the Green Alliance, and also what we do in our own net zero work in Resolution Foundation is really making sure that we have that concrete fact base behind us, and trying to make it as accessible as possible. You mentioned social media; that's something that's really important for all think tanks. Is really engaging with social media, even in sort of the complex way that social media is changing at the moment with many different platforms. It's really important to get your messages across as widely as possible. Wondering, Sachin, on those 2 points on credibility and accessibility, and also on skills translating research into real policy change, do you think you have anything you want to add on that?
Yeah, I think one of the things that think tanks can do quite effectively is explain kind of complex things for the average person and do a lot of outreach. So at the Institute for Government, we have lots of explainers on how government works, because it is quite opaque and quite confusing. Like, even ministers coming into government won't have an idea about what a cabinet committee is and what that means for their work and how you make decisions across government. So we put in quite a lot of effort to make sure that we've got this strong foundation so that the public can understand how government works and use that as a foundation to then make the recommendations that we have, which can be a bit more complex and thinking about not necessarily just how things work, but how they can work more effectively. And being able to have something that is publicly accessible out there and ensuring that people can have a good sense of the institutions in government and how decision making is done is something that we found particularly effective, including kind of during the pandemic when rules were changing quite frequently and when decision maker structures were changing quite a lot. And also during the Brexit years as well, when there were kind of constant parliamentary votes and understanding actually what was going on was just very difficult to follow. So being able to act as this kind of translator between the slightly opaque, slightly kind of mysterious structures of government and what's going on there and the broader public is something that we found was really valuable for building our credibility and being able to communicate things in simple terms for the public.
Yeah, that's like a really lovely analogy there in terms of how to build up credibility, and the translator and the Institute of Government does a lot of work there on the actual mechanism behind government that often we refer to because it can be extremely complicated. Lots of questions coming in now, which is really great, and there's a particularly good one that I've just noticed on how do you challenge dominant narratives or introduce radically new ideas without being dismissed as too idealistic or impractical? That's a really good question, and it is certainly something that's a challenge. That's sort of striking the right balance of knowing when it is the time to introduce new ideas and when is the time, for instance, to try and shape a narrative that already exists as possible. And I think something that I, for instance, have enjoyed really a lot of the Resolution Foundation is recently a piece we worked on around housing and ethnicity, and specifically housing affordability, which perhaps was something that hadn't been looked at as much in the past, but we know that the government is looking, for instance, big changes around housing, around delivering new homes. And so we thought, okay, this is the time to put something particularly radical out there and perhaps time to look at this specific issue. And really proud of the what we produced out of it and sort of the event that we held afterwards. And we had a clear recommendation at the end of it that we would like to sort of look at inquiries into the various forms of discrimination that might exist around housing access. And that for us was a really big moment in terms of calling for inquiries. We don't necessarily do that particularly often, but it felt like the right time. So judging the right time is really important when you're thinking about those big ideas. Wondering if any of the panel want to come in about how they go about introducing radically new ideas without being dismissed as too idealistic or impractical.
I would say that if you feel that there is a situation, a crisis, a challenge that could be answered by those radical ideas, then the answer is it's always a good time. And I think what you might have to expect some of the time is that, so for example, at the CSJ, approximately 4 in 10 of our recommendations are usually adopted by government. Some of those can get adopted quite quickly. Some of those, we've had some recommendations where it's taken 10 years to be adopted. And often they are those big recommendations. But I think as long as you can see the solution, you can communicate that challenge and that solution, there is definitely always a need for those bigger, more radical, system-changing ideas if they are going to truly benefit people, and if you can truly evidence that. And I think it just takes, again, it might just take that little bit more persistence in terms of influencing and kind of getting across that message.
Yeah, that's really well put about getting across the message in that way. And lots more questions coming in and some compliments as well about the panel, which is always nice to read. Quite an interesting question here about collaboration between think tanks and whether collaboration between think tanks is an important factor to successful policy change, and to what extent would you say think tanks compete with each other for influence in the policy making space? That's quite important and difficult question there. So wondering, Sophie or Sachin, do either of you want to come in on that? Competing with think tanks, or actually is it much more collaborative approach? I think the fact that we're all on this panel together, part of the network, really emphasises it is a collaborative approach, but wondering what others' takes on it are.
Yeah, shall I kick off? Green Alliance is very collaborative by nature, I think, because we work as part of a broader environmental movement, and we convene a lot of those organisations, bringing them together regularly and try to help shape and kind of finesse certain political strategies, particularly. On the politics side of things, there's a lot of environmental organisations get a bit of a bad rep for being very radical and less kind of grounded in the day-to-day. I think through a lot of like communications, we do that quite well. So we have a blog and we platform a lot of other organisations and individuals through that. Through our events as well, we often look for panels similar to this, and have had IFG on some of our health panels that we ran back in October last year, where we were talking about how we can push health and climate up the agenda together as they sit in separate government departments. Could that sit maybe at the Cabinet Office? And we had a bit of a debate on that on the panel and how that would work. I do think think tanks sometimes get a bad reputation as well for being a bit kind of underground in terms of the lobbying, but actually there's a lot of really great work that they do, and a lot of it, like you've said, is very public facing. But yeah, I think broadly we work well together, and I think it's also right for us to be kind of critical of each of us work, because that means that it's strengthened kind of overall. And yeah, we also have different audiences, so can sometimes come at the same policy through a different narrative or target different audiences, whether that be different media outlets or different politicians, to kind of get more people talking about similar ideas.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that key point there is that often we do have really different audiences, and you can be working in the same field there, and being able to reach as wide an audience as possible is really, really important. And I think what's really nice about this panel and sort of this broader think tank network is that we all work on slightly different fields, whether it be mechanisms, government, environmental policy, living standards, education. And yet there is still actually lots of common ground in areas that we work on. For instance, just a few weeks ago, I went to the IFG for a meeting where they were able to provide some really helpful advice on public services, because they do a lot of work there. And I'm sure lots of people would come to IFG requesting meetings given some of their really specific expert areas and stuff. So wondering, Sachin, if you want to talk about some of the collaborative work that you guys do.
Yeah, definitely. I think we view at the IFG, we kind of view ourselves as playing quite a valuable role in kind of adding value about those structures of government and how things can be done. And it means that we can look at certain topics from quite a fresh perspective and think about things in that way. So, for example, some colleagues and I have been working on asylum policy and migration policy in the UK. And obviously this is quite a contentious issue and something in which a lot of people have, quite strong opinions. But we think we could add quite a valuable role in terms of thinking about how asylum policy and the way in which asylum policy has been delivered is something that governments have struggled with for many years, for decades, in fact. And thinking about what those underlying problems are, and thinking about how that undermines the overall functioning of government and how you can essentially run that better. Not necessarily think about it in terms of policy outcomes way, but how can you set up the system so that it works better for people going through the system, and better for the government, better for local authorities as well. And as part of that, we were able to bring together quite a kind of different range of sources of expertise. So we drew on our kind of traditional things about the mechanisms of government and how you make decisions across government, for instance. We also drew on analysis of statistics, but we also did a focus group with people going through the asylum system to really understand what their first-hand experiences were. And we made sure to bring that out in the report as well. And having the combination of these three things, using our kind of unique position and our unique expertise and drawing on that catalogue of work that we've got to then make an intervention about an issue that isn't necessarily the core of the IFG's work, was something that we found was really valuable.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting point, specifically about expanding beyond just the core work and also on focus groups. And I'm wondering if, Beth, you want to sort of discuss about the nuances between quantitative research and data and how important that is for influencing government, but also qualitative research and actually talking to people and focus groups like Sachin mentioned.
Yeah, I think in reality, to deliver a really quality piece of research, you want both. I think the data can really help you understand the extent of the issue, the size of the issue, and even often the long-term impact of the issue. I mentioned with our school absence work, our brilliant data team at the CSJ has done some work kind of pulling together what are the long-term outcomes of a child being persistently absent from school? And we've been able to surmise that a child who is persistently absent from school in later life is more prone to becoming NEET, not in education, employment or training, or even being involved in the criminal justice system, and even just the earlier impact on their GCSE. So I think using the data to kind of pull out those really important stories, the quantitative data. But in terms of the qualitative, I think that is really where you can understand the stories behind the data. And again, I come back to kind of a lot of time I spend speaking with charities and schools and alternative provisions, and even pupils and parents themselves, and trying to understand what are the stories behind those figures, because behind every figure there's an individual story. And again, going back to that, what is happening on the ground that is working. So I think in order to deliver a truly kind of really quality piece of research with some really well evidence-based recommendations, you need a bit of both.
Yeah, that is really, really well made, and that the story being behind the figures, like often at Resolution Foundation we might talk about averages, but we're also really keen to speak about what's behind those averages, because those, as I said, are real people and like real effects. And wondering how at Green Alliance they do it, given that I can imagine net zero, they're very, very data driven. How do you sort of get across sort of the qualitative element as well?
Yeah, we try and speak to a lot of businesses as well to make a clear business case. That's often where a lot of the ambition kind of outstrips that of government, particularly national government. Like a lot of local governments are more ambitious than national government. But also I think politicians are so led by what the public tell them. So if there are quotes and stories, like you said, that's really what kind of captures their attention and can motivate them to become a champion on an issue and really push it forward. We see that with a lot of bills that are named after individuals. That's because there's a particular story that has really hit home with an individual that has maybe put that forward for a private member's bill in Parliament. But yeah, through the media, you really need a clear story on how it impacts individuals. So we do also do some commission polling and focus groups for particular pieces of work. But we are looking at including the social justice element into kind of embedding that in a lot of our projects going forward, particularly as the cost of living isn't going anywhere. And we want to make sure the climate change isn't costing people anymore, and that the solutions are really working for them both financially and through better living standards and eradicating inequality. So those angles are really what we try to highlight through our communications when we do our research, because that's what really kind of hammers the point home to politicians and can drive change.
Yeah, and that point specifically about how politicians are really influenced by about this public opinion, and actually influencing that can be a real vehicle towards influencing policy is really well made and a really interesting one. A good question here about AI. So I might open this up to see who wants to take this one. Should we worry about a future where AI and automation take over a significant portion of policy research and analysis? Very, very good question. And I think maybe I'll start while I'll give the panelists some time to think about that. It's a really well-made point. I think the way that I sort of would look at it is that I would very much see it actually, AI can be a tool to help us develop our policy research and analysis skills. I think it's really important that all organizations, for instance, have an AI sort of protocol in terms of how their researchers should use it, and it's really helpful that we have one sort of here at Resolution Foundation, and actually we can use it as a tool to really benefit us in the research. So for instance, something like coding, which you might do when you're looking at big data sets, artificial intelligence can really help provide clear sort of instructions in case you're ever struggling there. So I don't think it's quite at the point yet that it will displace us. I definitely think we can see it as a helping hand. But it is a really, really good point. Wondering if panelists at all use AI at all at work, or think that they're concerned that their jobs might be taken away.
I think, like you said, I think it can be a useful tool, but I think a lot of the skills that you need to do influencing policy aren't necessarily things that AI can do. You know, we've spoken about creativity and passion and determination, and also building strong relationships and things like that. Those aren't really things that technology can do. And I think that's really a way in which working in a think tank you can add value. And yes, you can use something as a tool, but actually the key parts of influencing policy are about things that are a bit more human, shall we say.
Definitely, and really well made point. I'm not sure an AI learning language model can yet tell a minister exactly how to change.
I mean, maybe they can. I'd like to be proven wrong if someone can show me. But
yeah, definitely. And then we've got time for one more question before closing remarks, and that's on quite an interesting one on social media and whether it's made it easier or more difficult to influence government. Sophie or Beth, either of you want to come on? Has it made it easier or more difficult?
I think it's a little bit of both, and I think that probably depends on how you use it. I think sometimes issues can maybe be simplified by social media when you've already got so many characters, and perhaps there it doesn't get to the nuance of the debate. But at the same time, as I mentioned, a key part of our school absence campaign has been public awareness, and social media has played a big role in that, in kind of helping to communicate people through social media about the levels of school absence through kind of be it vox pops, threads, things like that. So I think it depends how you use it, and it can be a bit of both. Yeah,
and I think that's exactly. There's no real concrete answer to that one. It's a mixture of both, and it's very much here to stay. And I think that's something that we all sort of think tank networks will be using it a lot, because it is a really vital tool. So we've come now towards the end of the panel. We've got some time for closing remarks. So just wondering if each of the panelists want to sort of reflect on sort of the last point they'd really mention in terms of influencing policy, what they want to maybe leave the audience with sort of going forward. Sophie, do you want to kick off with a big last point?
Yeah, I think actually something that we didn't mention in the AI conversation is the critical thinking, and that's what I think think tanks and individuals at think tanks are really useful, really important at doing. Especially a lot of the time we can get politician answers on whether they will or won't change certain policy in a certain way, or whether it kind of stands up to the scrutiny. And that's what I see our job as, but also thinking critically about future solutions to the big problems that we face in society today. So don't stop questioning things if you're out there. I think inquisitive attributes and being curious is really important, which I think is mentioned on earlier in this panel and on the other panel as well. So yeah, keep being passionate and keep questioning things.
Yeah, really, really well made point. And that critical thinking, keep questioning things, I think is a really lovely point to end on. Sachin, any final words?
Yeah, I think think tanks are fundamentally quite weird places in some ways, and it can be a bit unclear about exactly what they do. And like just explain your job to someone can be quite hard, because yes, you're influencing policy, but that policy might not necessarily happen. And in that way, it can feel a bit frustrating sometimes if what you're working on isn't necessarily part of the agenda of the government of the day. And yes, it might happen, but it might not happen in 5 years' time. And it might happen, but they might not directly credit you with Jeremy Hunt saying, I really value the work of Resolution Foundation. So I think in that respect, you do need to be quite resilient. You need to really believe and be passionate in what you do. You need to be prepared to kind of be in it for the long term and understand that what you're doing might not happen straight away, but having the kind of courage of your convictions, making sure that you know it's grounded in real kind of evidence and expertise in the conversations that you're having with people, I think it's something that's really valuable to be aware of.
Yeah, that point around resilience is so important. And I should add that that Jeremy Hunt quote is the only time I think a Chancellor has specifically mentioned a think tank with or at least the Resolution Foundation in recent memory with a concrete change in policy. So definitely don't expect that every day. And then Beth, any final words?
Yeah, brilliant. I mean, just to build on what we've said, I know the policy world and the think tank world can often feel a bit like over there and a bit almost like abstract. And I don't know if anyone who's watching is thinking this, but I know I had moments in the early stages of my career, kind of being of the background I am, of thinking like, do I have a place in this world? Is this world really for me? And if you're sat there thinking this, and I want to encourage you, the answer is yes. There's people sat here from varying backgrounds who kind of have successful careers in the think tank sector, who are contributing, who are influencing policy. And so just don't build your own barriers in your head. This world is absolutely for you. You will learn, you will develop, you will grow. And again, it just comes back to finding your area, finding your passion, stepping into it and going for it.
Yeah, what a brilliant point to end on there. This world is very much for you, and it's about, exactly as Beth said, finding your passion. So I really hope you enjoyed this panel. It's been really a privilege to chair with such a brilliant panelists. And we've come to the end of it now, unfortunately. And the next panel, which will start really, really shortly, is a really exciting one, and it's a day in the life of a researcher. So very much does what it says on the tin then. So I hope you enjoy that next panel as well.
Okay, well, hi everyone. Welcome to the session, A Day in a Life of a Researcher. We have a very exciting panel today with a lot of various diverse backgrounds. I'm Alina. I'm currently a research assistant at the Nutfield Trust. Next to me is Arundhati, who's a research fellow at the Institute for Employment Studies. Then we have Antonia, who is on the civil service fast stream and just had a placement at Pro Bono Economics and next placement at the Ministry for Housing, Community and Local Government. Then we have Xianru, who is a researcher at the Center for Cities, and lastly, Khan, who's a consultant at the New Philanthropy Capital. Thank you for joining in. We're going to speak a little bit about our journeys, what it's like to be a researcher. And I'd like to remind everyone who's joining in that questions will be answered towards the end. So please do submit them on Slido using the hashtag ThinkTanks. Thank you. So I'll just start with my journey and then everybody will speak about theirs. So I am a research assistant at the Nutfield Trust, and the Nutfield Trust is an independent think tank that provides evidence-based analysis of policies and intervention in health and social care. So we deal with parliamentarians, MPs, the NHS, media, civil servants, and the public. Sometimes we have funded and self-funded work. So I joined the trust almost exactly 1 year ago as a research assistant, and I was made permanent August last year after completing a Bachelor in Arts and Sciences in Societies and Health and a Master's in Data Science and Public Policy. I think out of everyone on this panel, I have the most quote-unquote classic journey to being a researcher in think tanks. But I would not say that I began my studies thinking I would be in this position today. So I say I carved my way into being in the think tank world without even knowing it. My academics has always been quite interdisciplinary. I've always been quite curious. And in first year, everything changed just because I took a course in quantitative research methods. And then after that, my academics was just about introducing statistics, coding in all the political science and health courses I did. And I applied to a couple of internships, and then after that, it just led me to my master's, which was in data science and public policy. And it was actually the first time it has ever run in the UK. So I kind of took a chance on it because it just felt exciting. So I think applying as a quantitative researcher, but not having done any necessarily specific studies on it, because I had a kind of like unusual and fully interdisciplinary background, it was not always easy, but it definitely was an advantage. Because I was able to like have a good understanding of how the data relates to real world. And I was drawn to the Nutfield Trust because not only I saw that they valued this kind of interdisciplinarity, but also because they have this opportunity to write blogs and charts of the week and have like projects outside of your normal projects, like funded or self-funded projects, and that is no matter your seniority. So this just showed that basically they supported any ideas that and anyone that come from anybody in the organization, which kind of showed after 6 months after being there, I just pitched an idea about women's health outside of maternity care, which they kind of put me in charge of this project 6 months after being there. So I think it's just a great place to explore your interests and kind of go in and be curious about the world and ask questions. And it feels like a real privilege because you're surrounded by experts who always want to learn more, and would learn from you as well. And you also get to have like influence at many different levels in health and social policy, and you get to speak with people who are on the front line. I think one of the challenges that I've encountered in this is feeling kind of overwhelmed about people's expertise, but that's, I think, a general feeling maybe. And you have to just remind yourself that expertise builds with time. So give yourself time. Okay, having said that, I'm gonna pass the torch to Arundhati, who is gonna speak a little bit about her experience.
Thanks, Melina. I'm Arundhati. I'm here from the Institute for Employment Studies. Slightly different in that we're not a traditional think tank, we're a research institute, and we look at employment policy, championing best practice in the world of work and working with employers to really bring that to life. So yeah, we really aim to bring actionable insights based on a really robust evidence base where we can. My journey into the sector, I think, was a slightly more indirect one as compared to you, Melina, I'd say. I have a background in psychology and HR, and I've also worked in academia, so worked in research there. So yeah, I think, and in addition to that, I'm Indian and I have a background from India. So I did sort of identify that I really wanted to work in this space, particularly because it's really collaborative and you really get to see your research come to life and it put into action. But when I first entered, felt quite daunted by the UK policy landscape, and that was definitely something that held me back to start with. But I think what I wanted to say today was that it's really important to really focus on the skills you bring to a role. For me, that meant, the primary research skill. I'd spent so much of my education and my work-life building really came in handy. And like Melina said, it's really building that knowledge and expertise as you go, and learning to apply the skills that you bring to the job. And I can speak to IES that, learning on the job is very much encouraged, and you're very well supported to do that where you can. In terms of the work I do, I'm a mixed methods researcher, so I work on both quantitative and qualitative work. Of late, my work has had a little bit more of a qualitative focus. And how we work at IES is that you get to work on a range of projects simultaneously. So we bid for all the work we do, and it's a really sort of enriching way to work, I find. So for instance, some of the projects I've been working on include an NIHR project looking at retention of late career nurses, a project for the HSE looking at stress at work, evaluation of the government's Help to Grow management program, and we're also doing some work for the Construction Industry Training Board looking at how we can attract more people into the sector. So real sort of broad range of projects there, but I think, I really enjoy the variety of the work we do, and the ability to sort of dip in and out of projects and interest areas as you go. It's not sort of unlike consulting in that way, and it keeps me very engaged is what I will say. And I think sort of my takeaway from having worked in the sector some time now has been just, while I felt like I had sort of more indirect journey into the sector or a little bit more of an atypical background, I've since worked with team members and colleagues who come from a range of different backgrounds. And I think, it's when we all come together and all bring a different point of view or different expertise, and we all sort of learn from each other and draw on each other's expertise, that really enjoy working in that collaborative way. So I think sort of there isn't really a typical background or a typical pathway into the sector. At least that's been my experience. I've worked in really diverse teams that are really stronger for being for everyone's different backgrounds and points of views. So yeah, I just wanted to say that that's everything I had. Antonia, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. Thank you both. Yeah, I think my reflections are going to be slightly different because my journey into the think tank sector was less intentional, I suppose. So I am on a graduate program called the Civil Service Fast Stream, which means that I'm employed by central government, the civil service, and I ended up at Pro Bono Economics as one of my placements on the scheme. But I think I'm going to talk a bit more about how my skills have transferred from what I studied into getting on the fast stream, the jobs I've had in central government, and how I applied those in the think tank sector. So yeah, I think I had what, upon reflection, is a fairly normal route into research in that I studied geography at uni. I just thought it was the most interesting thing ever. I think I'm naturally a sort of generalist. I find everything interesting. And I think the key thread among what I studied was just critical thinking, being curious, and being adaptable. So with the nature of geography, you study a really wide breadth of topics, from climate science to biology, sociology, epidemiology, like a real host of things. And I think I learned how to research in a lot of different contexts. And then so after that, when I was looking at what career I wanted to undertake, to be honest, I kind of stumbled onto the fast stream. But yeah, it's a leadership program, but I'm specifically on the statistics stream. So that's focused specifically on data analysis, statistical research, and producing government statistical publications. And my first posting in government was at what used to be the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. And there I was running the department's Public Attitudes Tracker, which is a public household survey that tracks the public's attitudes to the department's policy areas. So basically that was climate change, energy bills, renewables. That was a really interesting kind of first taste of research because I was working a lot with policymakers, ministers, and kind of dealing with, I suppose, like the actual communication of the analysis a lot more than I'd ever had any experience of at uni, where I was doing mainly the research. Then my second posting, I was at HMRC, where I was working on the Measuring Tax Gap publication, which measures the value of tax non-compliance in the UK. So that was a very quantitative job. Luckily, I come from a bit of a maths background before, so I was able to pick things up, but it was a lot of really big, complex models that I was responsible for. A few of that all fed into a really big model to produce this big number that was really important. But yeah, so that was really interesting as well, because that was much more on the quantitative skills. I got really quite proficient in R, which I found to be very, very useful. And then for my next posting on the scheme, you get not that much choice. You get to choose whether you want to go into the private sector, the public sector, or the charity sector. And I really fancied going into the charity sector because I've been told that working in a smaller organisation, you get much more creative freedom, you get much more responsibility, you just get much more exposure. So that's what I did, and I got assigned to Pro Bono Economics, which at the time I didn't know anything about, or the think tank sector in general. So I was really going in blindly, but I found it really exciting, and there I was kind of hit the ground running as a quantitative analyst. I worked on a survey with the Charity Commission into the diversity of trustees in the UK, which was really interesting, and then also on some analysis of local government, local authority data on the provision of children's services over time by different provider types. And the things that I found really interesting about the think tank sector was the things that I was hoping for. It's really like flexible in terms of what you're interested in and what you want to work on. I got to apply my skills, but in a much more intentional way on projects that I really wanted to work on, which I think is something that was reflected from the others. But yeah, in general, I've just found it was a really exciting time to really explore my interests. And yeah, there's just so much scope in the think tank sector for research.
Thank you so much. That was so interesting. Now we have Xiangru, who is going to talk a little bit about Center for Cities and her experience.
Yeah. Thank you, Melina. My name is Xuanru, and I work at Center for Cities. We are a think tank working to improve the economies of UK's large city and town, and we produce database research and policy ideas to help government to address the challenges and opportunities they face, from boosting productivity to housing to industrial strategy, devolution, and more. I joined the institution a year ago as a research intern, just after I finished my master's degree in regional and urban planning. Then I joined as a researcher in last August. I didn't start out with the clear goal of working in the think tank, actually. I just know I wanted to do something research related, so I looked into different options, like a research assistant in university department, consultancy, and think tank, of course. That's how I end up getting my internship and in a way just stumble into the think tank world. And now I really like how it sits between the academia and industry. You get to learn skills all the time, and also work with data sets you might never think otherwise, and discuss with colleagues who share your interest, kind of like being in a seminar. And there's also a lot of communicating research and ideas to external people, whether they're politicians or policymakers or people in industries that we are doing analysis on. You will be giving presentation and maybe conducting research interviews or doing videos. There's all different kind of formats. And there's also a very wide range of projects we will work on in a think tank. I started on a project on the how the pandemic affects London's population and doing data analysis using R. And after that, I find I'm pretty comfortable with coding, so I started to working on the transition of the data production process for our organization from a Excel-based approach to a more systematic approach using R. And besides that, now I'm also doing blogs and briefings and reports, mainly focused on housing and, well, including examples like studies on post-war house building and also build-to-rent sector in UK. And these outputs usually end up as publications on our website, and they will be disseminated on social media like Blue Sky and LinkedIn. Sometimes they also go to urban leaders and Whitehall. I will stop there, but if you're interested in our work or other think tanks' work, I think check their social media or their website would be really helpful, so you can know what they're really interested in and how they present findings and who their audience is. So you can identify the skills they're looking for and build your own and create a profile that they're interested in. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And that was such a good point you made about the use of social media and finding out more about the organization, especially Blue Sky. I don't know if other organizations are there, but yeah, Nuffield Trust is also on there. Hey, Khan, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. I will be short as possible because I'm mindful of time and we want to answer as many questions as possible during our remaining time. I'm Khan. I work for New Philanthropy Capital, NPC, which is a consultancy for the social sector. We are not for profit. We are a registered charity, but we work as a consultancy like they do in the private sector. So we do have client work, we do have funded work, we have grant work, and I have a portfolio of different types of clients and different types of projects. We work with charities, foundations, philanthropists, impact investors, and corporates. And based on their needs, based on the project briefing, we provide research services and also consultancy services. So research is just a part of what we do, because when you're a consultancy, you have to do project management and client management on top of research. So to give a couple of examples from the portfolio, at the moment I'm working with a philanthropist And this philanthropist funds more than 100 charities across the UK. And what we do is that we do grant management and monitoring on behalf of the trustees. So we are the point of contact for this philanthropist, and we manage their portfolio on behalf of the trustees. Another project is the project that we do with Lloyds Bank Foundation. For example, it's a mixed method research where we are investigating funding flows in the criminal justice system. So as a part of that project, we interviewed many charities working in the sector. We used national data sets and charity register to understand who's out there, who's funding what, and what type of activities are being funded. And we are going to present our findings in a public event in a couple of months. This is just one part of research that we do, and I'm really happy that I'm part of MPC because it allows me to be a generalist than a specialist. And it depends on your background, obviously, whether you enjoy working across different projects, across different topics. But personally, I do enjoy having that thing in my life where I wake up every day and there's something new expecting me in my outlook. And one thing that before I finish my part, one of the things that we are doing at MPC is that we recently started doing is that developing dashboards. And this is something really interesting for the charity sector because the third sector, the think tank sector, or the charity sector, however you put it, we do have data. We do enjoy looking at data, but based on resources that you have, especially if you're a small charity, you may not be equipped to deal with data that you have. As a consultancy, we provide that service that we look at different data sources you have and we try to bring them all together through a very easily digestible way. It can be a live dashboard through Power BI, it can be a data visualization through Canva. So these are all the skill sets that we use as a consultancy to help the charity sector thrive and reach out to more people. That's me.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you everyone for sharing. That was very interesting to hear everybody's background and journeys, but also to hear that we're kind of doing very important work early on in our careers. Now we are going to go to the audience for some questions. So again, if you do have questions, use the hashtag ThinkTanks on Slido. I'm going to kick us off with a question. So if you could go back in time and give yourself a cheat sheet on how to break into the think tank world or become a research expert relied upon your team or stakeholders, what 3 things would be on it? So 3 things that you think would help you break into the think tank world today, maybe that you had back then or just found out after going into. Does anybody want to kick off?
Yeah.
Can? Yeah.
First of all, it's very pleasing to being called research expert. I'm called by your team and stakeholders. Thank you for that. It's going to be difficult to find 3 things, but first things first, I have to say, your dissertation, if you're a university student, you're going to do your dissertation, and this is a perfect opportunity to develop the necessary skill sets to become a research expert, dealing with different projects and different topics. And there's a tendency that I've observed, including in myself, that we tend to do easy things for the dissertations. We tend to stick to the methodologies we are comfortable with, and we tend to do the things that we are already aware of, right? And I think when you have the support from your lecturers at uni, you have to be out of your comfort zone when dealing with your dissertation. Try something new, try explore, try different methodologies, try to bring different data sets together and use that as an opportunity to engage with work, right? And that will be a very hands-on experience that you can talk about for the first couple of years of your professional life, to be honest. I still talk about my own dissertation. So I guess, people should stick to doing something challenging for dissertation. And that's one thing, but can cover three things, everything.
Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to just say, I'd maybe look at it in terms of skills you can, bring to the sector. So like Khan said, I think research skills are key, and your dissertation tends to be a big part of that, or just try to get research experience wherever you can. So I think that would be one. Two, maybe, I'd say communication skills. You can do the best research in the world, but it's really communicating it in an effective way to your audience, and really distilling it to key points. And I think the third would be, and it's something we, most of us do sort of unconsciously and in our everyday lives, would be stakeholder management. Often you're dealing with, teams, and as you develop in your career, managing teams, talking to clients and the media, and it's really learning how to juggle all those different balls. So that's what would be on my cheat sheet, but I don't know about everyone else.
I think I can go. If I can remember the three things that I just thought of. The first one I was going to say definitely was to follow your interests when you're at uni, but also when you're at school and in your career, because I remember when I was at uni, people were kind of saying like, oh, you should pick your kind of options, or you should write your coursework essays on things that are really similar, so that it's tactical, right? So it's easier to revise for and easier to write. But I was thinking, no, I want to do them on completely different things. And I felt like that really just set me up really well to be able to switch mindset so quickly between different kind of content areas, but kind of carry the same skills throughout. The second thing that I would say is to sort of find your niche. So whether that's something that you're particularly good at, or it's a perspective you bring. So I suppose that's particularly relevant in the diversity space, because everyone has a perspective that they can bring to an organisation or to research or to a team that someone else won't have. Or it could be a particular skill or something that you find easy, because that will always be valuable to a team if you can bring something that they might not be as good at. And the third thing, I definitely am not going to remember what it was. If it comes back to me, then
No.
I think I will just add one thing.
Go ahead.
When you see something you are interested in, you sign up for their newsletters and see if there's some public events you can go to, so you can explore different things and you can know what you are really interested in. And it's also a good way to know the world outside academia, because it can be kind of different. Back then, I know very little about that, and I really hope I can know it as early as possible.
Yeah, I just want to echo what everybody was saying. I think following your interest has given me so much edge. So when I was in my final year of university of bachelor's, I was just doing this program. We were paired up with a researcher from another university, and it was just a way for us to know what they're doing. I was just very curious about one topic, and I developed just a network analysis on that topic. And it just so happened, without even speaking to this researcher, that they were looking for someone to do that. And so they contacted me afterwards, and that's how I got my first role, part-time, as a research assistant, by pure chance, just because I was interested in something and I followed it. So on top of following your interest, I would also say, speak up. Don't worry about saying the wrong thing, but do speak up. Do let people know what you are interested about, what you like to do, even if it's learning, even if you're just interested in a subject and you don't have that much expertise, and you're like, oh, I would like to, get better at coding, get better at qualitative interviewing. Do share what you have with others, and
I remembered what my third
Please,
point
go
was
ahead.
going to be.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, my third point was actually going to be don't be afraid to forget things, because I think in the way that we've all been speaking, we've been talking about how much we love switching between research topics and being interdisciplinary and kind of building a portfolio. But the nature of that is that you will just forget things, and that's fine because the skills will still be there, and also that knowledge will still be there as well. Like, it's easy to build that back up. Like, if you leave an area behind, like if you come back to that in the future in your career, like you'll be able to build that up again. So I think I often felt quite paranoid about like forgetting things that I've done, or like forgetting the intricate details of something that I've studied or researched on. But like, that is fine. Yeah.
Thank you so much. If nobody wants to add anything more to that, let's go to our next question. And I think it's something, I'm just going to select something a bit topical about digitalization. So how much is digitalization dashboards, you've been speaking about, Khan, generative AI, influencing your work and research in your day-to-day? And have you seen them change over the course of your professional experience? Does anybody want to kick off?
Yeah, should I?
Yeah, can.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
Have you seen them change over the course of your professional experience? That's a very positive view of my professional experience. I'm still new in the field, so a couple of years. But with digitalization and dashboards and Gen AI, let me start with Gen AI. Gen AI, I think it's a very fast-moving world, and at the moment in the organization, we are also thinking about how to incorporate Gen AI and how to do something different than just creating a chatbot or creating something like eligibility quiz, right? There are many applications that you can use Gen AI, but at the moment, I tend to see that people use Gen AI just for the sake of it, and they just create something that is already out there. At the moment in our organization, we try to come up with different agents where we can automate certain processes and save time and resources by doing the tasks manually over and over again. So that is one thing that we are thinking about and trying to figure out a way. And the second thing is about how we can use Gen AI and its processing abilities to process vast information from publicly available sources. So if like over time, I guess that when we are successful, right, either us or someone else, it will drastically change the amount of time we spend on research. So because at the moment, research includes so much time and effort just to bring different sources together and finding those sources. And with Gen AI, I think we are fairly sure that we can use any of the Gen AI to create a list of sources that we should look at. So it really saves time. I'm not saying it's the most credible way to do it, but over time it will improve and we will get there. In terms of dashboards, this is, coming back to what I said before, digestible outputs is really important, right? In like creating digestible outputs is really important in doing research, because you may have the best finding, but if your audience doesn't engage with it, it doesn't mean anything. So you have to create very digestible outputs for any type of work you do. Dashboard is one of them. And the beauty of dashboards is that you can keep them live, right? They can automate themselves over time, and they can get data and they can stay up to date. Even if you check now, a week time, a month time, they will be updated. And it will again save so much time bringing different sources together to create that output. So overall, I guess to keep up with the developments in the space, you have to be very familiar with the software programs so that you know what's going on and you know how you can incorporate those things into work you do. I guess like for some coding experience also, it will be useful to hear your thoughts as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, I feel like my perspective on this is going to be quite different from yours, because working in central government, things are just a lot slower in terms of taking on new technologies, because obviously we can't use open source, well, not open source, well, yeah, like generative AI that have open, that use training sets from across all of the internet. You can't put public data or anything sensitive in there. So there's no use of generative AI in government unless it's completely internal. Dashboards, I can say, definitely are really, really important in communicating analysis and communicating data and the story between technical experts and the people that need to be able to digest it quickly. So whether that's policy people, senior stakeholders, operational colleagues, dashboards are really important for communicating analysis. I can say specifically from the coding perspective, it has been really useful, I suppose, because it can help fill those gaps where you know how to do something, but you can't remember, or you don't know how to synthesize something. So yeah, I think I have seen that change even over the course. Again, I've got a very short professional experience. Over the course of my 2.5-year professional career, I've seen a lot of change in this space. And yeah, I think it's hard to say what the capabilities of that can be, but it's an exciting time to be in research.
Yeah, I want to echo Antonia's coding point. I'm not come from data science or any coding background, so I have almost zero experience in R, or a little bit experience in Python maybe, but not very good at it before I joined Center for Cities. Then I find this could be really helpful, so I started to learn it. My 80% of knowledge coming from ChatGPT. I just doing things and ask it, and when it went wrong, I ask again and try to produce a usable coding in the end. And now I feel like I'm pretty comfortable in that, and now coding is a huge part of my work. So just want to say to those people who are not really come from a coding background, if you're interested in this, with Gen AI and other tools, we can definitely do it. So
yeah. No, that's a good way of looking at it as a bit of an equalizer. I've definitely seen things change just because of how fast everything is moving. I think we're in the process of seeing how that fits into our work. I don't know if we've arrived at a conclusion. Like Antonia said, we can't put any personal sensitive data onto generative AI models. So sort of use so far has been limited in that way. But I think as time goes on, this is more just what I think. We're likely to just see it as a tool and hopefully realize the efficiency gains that come along with that.
I kind of agree with everything that has been said. Obviously have only been a professional for a year. So in the professional world, there is definitely an appetite for dashboarding, for digestible information, especially when you're talking to or addressing people who have not as much time to look through 200 pages report. So I think there is time for one last question. And just to wrap everything together, so we've been asked to what do you think are the key skills for translating research into real policy change? And how can entry-level professionals build them? Antonia, did you want to?
You go first.
So, I think it is quite difficult when you, especially are entry-level, and when you're starting your career, to actually see the impact that your research has, and how your research can affect the conditions that people are working in. So I know I've worked on a project about nurses and midwives practice learning, and I think it hit me how much our research had impact when I was speaking to them, when I was interviewing them. And after doing the research, there is this process of dissemination that goes on. So you speak to like other organizations, you try to reach as many people as you can through either like social media or through like different opportunities that your organization has for you. But as an entry-level professional, I guess you can use social media to build on that, to have the discussion, or even to start a discussion on it. Especially, I think Blue Sky, as we said earlier, I think that's a safe space for researchers to come together and talk about their research, but also for people to listen in terms of what they think could change. Antonia.
Yeah, I think my point was going to be similar in that I think one of the key skills, at least, is being able to communicate analysis and technical research to non-technical audiences, to synthesize ideas or conclusions in a way that is both digestible and attractive for people to read and understand, because you can do whatever amazing, brilliant, complex research you like, but if people don't understand it, then no one's going to do anything. And so I think the point about social media is one angle, but also just like whatever job you do, you'll be dealing with stakeholders. Your communication skills and ability to translate your story from your research into something that they can both understand and buy into, I think is one of the most important skills that you can build, especially as an entry-level professional.
Yeah, I can come in there too. I think key is starting from a really strong evidence base, and a lot of sort of the weight of what you have to say comes from that. And then, like you both said, it's really distilling it to key digestible messages. I don't always think what we do is very complex, but it's just easier to it's just making it easier to read and come across. I think in the work I've done, I've seen it be particularly effective to co-create recommendations. So to sometimes work with the population you're studying, or to work with key stakeholders in a client organization, or where you want to implement the recommendations you're making. That can work particularly well because you're making sure that while the research captures the different voices, you're running by the recommendations and creating those along with the effective groups as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you all. And on the point on simplify your message, I think an example would be make it more, how to say it. For example, when I'm doing my project on the internal migration for London after pandemic, we can say in this way. For example, the outflow to certain place, the size of outflow would be X size of a town. The town should be like very like known to most people, so people will feel it's more like sensible. And also we can like start our research with a hook. It could be a things happened recently that everyone cares about, or statement government recently announced. So I think that would be a really helpful way to communicate your research to the general public or policymakers.
Yeah, I don't have much to say. I agree with everyone. I'm not best placed to answer this question.
Well, thank you all so much, and thank you everyone who's joined in. We unfortunately cannot answer every question, but from what I understand, questions will be answered outside of the session. Just as like closing remarks, I would like to say that I think we agree that there's no usual path into the research sector, and that your perspective is so important and that your interests are so important. And I would like to open the floor to the panel for any like last advice that you would give anybody who's listening.
I might add on to the earlier question about generative AI to say, I think as time goes on, I want to caveat, what I said with a little bit of caution as well, because I think what we found with digitization and collecting data online is that, like with any method, it comes with its own drawbacks. And it's important as a researcher to be mindful of that in your design, and really make sure you're accounting for that and that it isn't creating biases in your data. So I think that's probably the piece of the puzzle that's missing to me at this stage. But yeah, I just wanted to add that in. But yeah, echo everything you said about, your point of view is your strength, so bring it to work in the sector.
Yeah, definitely. Any closing remarks for anybody else?
Yes. Stay up to date, stay relevant with the things happening around you, and try to get out of the comfort zone, especially if you're a college student, if you're a university student. Those are the best times to do that and try something new. You will get so many transferable skills by working in different sectors. Even if you want to end up in the think tank sector, work experience is a transferable thing as much as the voluntary experience as well. So get out of your comfort zone and stay up to date with what's happening around you.
Definitely, that's good. That's great advice. If nobody else has any last words, last advice, I'd like again to thank our panel today for a very interesting discussion, and everybody who's joined in. For anybody who's joined in, please do remember to complete the equality opportunity form. And this wraps up our event. So thank you so much to everyone.